Now we turn to Brooklyn, where people demanding justice in the case surrounding Akai Gurley. As many of you know here, Gurley, he was shot by a rookie New York Police Department officer, Peter Leong, in a dark stairwell of a Brooklyn housing complex. Gurley simply heading down the stairs in the dark because the elevator in his building out of service and the light bulb's not functioning well. Officer Leong patrolling the building, vertical patrol here. He didn't have the safety on his gun, and he had his weapon drawn, even though he wasn't responding to an active criminal investigation. He shot Gurley, and police officials have said that his actions were accidental. There's also speculation, though not confirmed to this point, that Leong called his union rep immediately after the shooting, looking for help and guidance, and that he only called 911 and emergency services 6 to 7 minutes later. Now, the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams, he spoke to us this week, and he said this information could present a huge twist in the case.
First of all, that's a game changer. I will hope that this information is incorrect. If he took 6 minutes to communicate with a union rep, and that union rep didn't tell him, immediately stop what you're doing and get this person first aid. If that didn't happen, that's a major problem.
I got a lot of questions with this, Mayo, but Ned Eric Adams is he himself a former police officer, former state senator, and now the borough president in Brooklyn. Is he right that the order of calls here and the time interregnum from the shot that was fired to the call that went into 911, 911, excuse me, that's very significant?
I think it's absolutely significant. It goes to show where this person's mindset was. It goes toward possible charges that could be filed against this officer. You're looking at basically possibly a criminally negligent homicide there, maybe more than that, probably even you can consider manslaughter there very easily. And it goes to show the mindset of this particular officer, not everybody, but if you're more concerned about your union rep than a guy you just shot and you know it's a mistake, even if you didn't know it's a mistake, let's assume the man was shooting at you. You still take an oath to serve and protect. You still have an obligation to contact medical, try to get him medical care as soon as possible. You talk to your union rep later.
Now, how this case is adjudicated and where and by whom is also another interesting question. It's headed for a grand jury, but there are open questions as to whether or not this is in fact the best way to go. This week, New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, he asked Governor Cuomo for jurisdiction going forward over all police killings of unarmed civilians as opposed to giving it to local prosecutors. This obviously after what we saw in Missouri and more recently what we saw on Staten Island when D.A. Donovan handled the case there. This is what Mr. Schneiderman had to say.
When the trust between the police and the communities they serve and protect breaks down, everyone is at risk. Many, including some of my colleagues here, have suggested that there is an inherent conflict when local district attorneys who work with police departments every day are asked to investigate members of those departments.
Not shockingly, the Kings County District Attorney, the Brooklyn DA, didn't agree. Ken Thompson, he released this following statement saying, in part, local prosecutors who were elected to enforce these laws in these communities should not be robbed of their ability to faithfully and fairly do so. I want to get your take on this, Jimmy. I understand his logic on it, but after we saw what happened in Staten Island, and there is precedence, I mean, this governor's own father, Mario Cuomo, used to handle it to an independent prosecutor. Do you like the idea of an AG, an independent prosecutor, or leave it to the DAs who arguably were elected by that borough to police or at least to adjudicate cases in that borough?
I think that what we've seen, not only from an effectiveness standpoint, but from a perception standpoint in the public, that special prosecutors should be appointed in situations like this because local prosecutors do have an inherent conflict, and I think that we've seen that in the past.
Where's the line, though? Well, you're not going to handle every case to an independent prosecutor. Where is the line, and who decides what is questionable shooting?
I think that the governor has the power to make that decision, and I think he can make that decision on a case-by-case basis.
Decides.
Well, here's the bottom line. Here's one of the things that bothers me. As soon as this shooting occurred, ADA Thompson came out and I think, immediately said he's going to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. Look, I don't see manslaughter. I see criminally negligent homicide, but this is far less egregious than what happened in the prior two cases. And it's almost as though the reverse is happening.
But you know what's funny for me?
He's going to go for blood with this officer.
I would argue that it's so funny how we look at these cases differently. For me, I think this one's more egregious. The poor guy's walking out of his apartment because the flipping elevator and the lights don't work. He's walking down the hall doing nothing. The guy, with not following protocol, he shouldn't have had his gun drawn. He shouldn't have the safety off. Blows the guy away for walking out of a door in his apartment. I'm not saying that Garner deserved to die, but this one to me was the most egregious. It's funny how different people can look
egregious in terms of I'm saying this is a young rookie officer who's told to go into a dark stairwell. He didn't shoot the person. His conduct, he wasn't shooting at the person. The gun went off accidentally. That's what I mean by less egregious.
Well,
in the other two cases, the officers were taking action
I want
against
you
these
guys to
individuals.
get the context and speak to what Jimmy just mentioned, but we sat down with Pat Lynch. We all know Pat Lynch's job, okay? He's head of the PBA. Now, their job is to advocate for police. And our own Dominic Carter sat down with them this week, and Lynch said police officers, they never get the benefit of the doubt.
Why is it that it's police officers that always get that double jeopardy? Well, if we don't like the result in this grand jury of this trial, well, let's run to Washington and get them to review. And then you have a review there. Does that happen to anyone else? Or is it just police officers that it happens to? I think it's unfair.
Well, that, first of all, factually is not correct. The federal civil rights statutes apply to correction officers. They apply in other institutionalized settings. They don't just apply. When I was in the Justice Department, we prosecuted many people acting under color of state law. That's what the federal statute's there for. But I wanted to respond briefly to some of your points. As you know, on this show, I've been advocating for special prosecutor in every case of police shooting through an office of special prosecutor in New York. I don't think it should be done gubernatorially, particularly in a selective way. And I think the major reason for this, and again, we've spoken about it before, is that you don't want to have the paroxysms of emotion. You don't want to have the rioting creating then the appointment. You want to have an institutional response that's stable.
But just, help me again, though. But just help me again. Give me the line. Wait, I'll give you a perfect example. We had an officer shoot a lunatic who went into a synagogue and stabbed somebody. Nobody, caught on video, nobody says the guy didn't deserve that the officer act rashly. But yet, an officer shot in that case. Yeah. But now you got one where he shoots in. Who decides which one goes to a prosecutor?
Who decides it? The agitators in the street decide whether it goes to a special prosecutor. Why should there be a presumption that this man is going to be anything other than completely impartial in the investigation?
This is why there should be a presumption, because as was stated earlier by Mr. Schneiderman, it's a point that's been made many times. When you have a local district attorney, the cases that local district attorney does are dependent on the local police agencies with whom he or she works.
Hold on, let me finish. Everything should just be turned over to the feds right away.
Hold on. It's not about the feds. It's not about the feds. There doesn't need to be the feds. There doesn't need to be the feds. You have a process which should be legislative, by the way. It shouldn't be done by the governor himself.
But actually, we have proposed legislation. We've got proposed legislation, and that proposed legislation requests a standing body. We're requesting there that they have full enforcement capability.
For which cases?
Any cases that involve police misconduct that's significant that it leads to the death or injury of a person. Now, the guy in the synagogue...
Is that limiting enough?
Is that limiting enough? The man in the synagogue...
The New York Court of Appeals has a body of case law on when a special prosecutor can and cannot be appointed.
But that can be legislatively
Absolutely, it can be changed. And we're not talking about cases where someone's engaged in wrongdoing.
It may be constitutional because we have a right to elect local officials.
Crime there. You'd say this guy's responding to a man who's clearly attacking him.
But Mayo, in Staten Island, the argument could have been made as well that they were responding to an individual who was also saying, I'm going to resist, I'm not going to let you arrest me.
I don't think so. There's no way on earth in Staten Island you can say that Mr. Garner did anything that would justify use of deadly force.
I'm only telling you, you four guys might think it's clean the lines where you can and you can't. And I certainly think, with all due respect here, that in Staten Island, at post-Ferguson, everybody had the sense, wait a second, prosecutors, when they want to get an indictment, they can get an indictment. When they don't want to get an indictment, they don't go for an indictment. I'm not even saying that shouldn't even be part of the process, Mark, but there are times when the public needs to think that they might not agree with the decision, but at least it was made without pressures from that particular community.
There's special prosecutors. If an assistant district attorney gets arrested, there's a special prosecutor. If a family member of someone who works in the DA's office gets arrested, there's a special prosecutor who has nothing to do with that office. We're not talking about a law enforcement officer who's going to get up and be working with those people, maybe presenting a case in front of that same grand jury the next day.
I'll give you 20 seconds.
No disrespect to any viewers out there, The unfortunate thing about Staten Island is that it happened in such close proximity to Ferguson, because any of the lawyers at this table who's handled a case in Staten Island knows that it's an entity unto itself that is very different from the other 4 boroughs. And anybody, putting Ferguson to one side in the optics, anybody who's handled a case in those courts could have seen this coming a mile and away. It's its own entity, and to draw conclusions, nationwide conclusions, about the state of racial relations and the police department based on what happens in Staten Island, that's way
No, we're
out.
drawing conclusions
My only
about
point that I'd argue with that one is, let's say the facts weren't as compelling as they are seemingly, at least in Brooklyn right now. And let's say with the anger that's raised, it's flipped around. And let's say the officer isn't an officer of color but shoots a person of color, but there believes to be justification. You don't think the odds of an indictment against that officer go much higher now with the political pressure? I got to hit a break.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Go to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on our question today as it relates to this issue in police shootings. We want to know who you think should conduct investigations like the ones we've just described here. The DA, independent prosecutor, or here, well, that should be that one, but altogether another entity. Anyway, we'll be right back with more on this. Stay with us.